Amadeus makes the experience of travel better for everyone everywhere by inspiring innovation, partnerships, and responsibility to people, places, and planet. Our technology powers the travel and tourism industry, inspiring more open ways of working, more connected ways of thinking, centered around the traveler. Our open platform connects the global travel and hospitality ecosystem, from startups to big industry players and governments too. Together, redesigning the travel of tomorrow. Amadeus, it's how travel works. Visit us to know more, amadeus.com.
Welcome to the Skift India Travel Podcast, your weekly dose of the latest trends and insights into the world of travel in India. I'm your host, Peden, and today joining us is Santosh Kumar, Booking.com's country manager for India, Sri Lanka, Maldives, and Indonesia. Welcome, Santosh.
Thank you, Peden. Always good to talk to you.
Same here, Santosh, and it's great to have you back with us after, it's been more than a year that you were here. Santosh, of course, a lot has changed in the last year that we spoke. So I just want to dive right in. Santosh, I want to talk to you about the recent, travel research survey that Booking.com had, which is the Travel Proud Research. It talks about heightened awareness and acceptance among LGBTQ families, that their trip will be influenced by their identity. That's what the research says, and the research also reveals that there is an increasing number of LGBTQ families that are embracing travel, especially multi-generational trips. Right. So, I want to ask you how LGBTQ family friendly a destination is India, and most importantly, how can destinations like India create a more inclusive travel experience? And what role do the stakeholders who are involved in the industry, what role do they have to boost the confidence of these travelers?
Really good question, Peden. And this is something for us at Booking.com we take very seriously. It kind of goes into the heart of, also our vision and mission, right, as a company. Essentially, we want to make travel easier for everyone to experience. And when we say everyone, we truly mean that. And, we say this all the time. We filter places and not people. And through our Travel Proud program, we are doing our bit to make travel more inclusive for LGBTQ plus travelers. Before we go into kind of what some of the measures could be, I'll tell you a little bit about the recent survey that we put out. And this was a survey that we did globally across 27 countries, including in India. And this happened in the last quarter. So it's fairly fresh data that we are looking at. In general, what I can tell you is that LGBTQ plus travelers globally still face a lot of challenges when they travel. And what stands out from an India perspective is that some of the survey responses that we saw, some of the challenges and the discriminatory aspects for India stand out very starkly when you compare it to the some of the global markets. And I'll give you a few examples, right? So a couple of the things that we heard, 92% of the Indian traveler respondents that we surveyed told us that they have experienced some form of discrimination when they travel, when compared with the global numbers, which sit at about 59%. And also, similarly, 72% of these respondents in India told us they agree that being LGBTQ plus makes them more insecure and self-conscious as travelers. Again, quite significantly standing out from the global number, which was coming in at about 51%. Right now, also, there are some things that Indian travelers also told us. Like, for example, they said they tend to pre-select airplane seats. 78% of them tend to pre-select their airplane seats to minimize the risks of any negative interactions with other travelers, compared to only about 46% globally. And
And this you're talking about the Indian outbound traveler, right?
The Indian LGBTQ plus traveler. It could be domestic, it could be
I mean,
outbound,
domestic. Okay. Okay,
anywhere, right?
domestic.
An
Okay.
Indian LGBTQ plus respondent is what I'm talking about compared to a
Mhm.
global respondent. And quite a large number of them also reported having had a negative experience with a fellow passenger due to them identifying as LGBTQ plus. This came in at about 63% for India versus 31%. And they also tend to take quite a bit of, let's say, steps to create, for example, like an alter ego to navigate difficult environments while they travel. They try to change their appearance and behavior to avoid any potential discrimination, etc. And again, all of these numbers stand out quite starkly when we look at some of the global figures, right? So clearly, that
Mhm.
says that there is a lot of work that needs to be done from an Indian context when we are thinking about making travel an equal experience for everybody, right? And therefore there are aspects that come into sort of what let's say the government is doing in this regard, as well as what are stakeholders like us in the industry that we're doing in order to make let's say the world a safer place, a more equal place for people, where they're not filtered based on what their preferences are or what their identities are, right? And for example, what we are doing through our Travel Proud program is we conduct trainings for our partners across the world to help them get a better understanding of the specific challenges that are faced by LGBTQ plus travelers. And once the training is done,
And Santosh, do you see? I'm sorry, but I wanted to understand. Do you see Indian travel stakeholders interested in, like you said, that
yeah,
you kind of sensitize them about, what are the concerns of these travelers? So, do you see Indian travel stakeholders interested in these, in these sessions or workshops or whatever you conduct?
yeah, it is still on the lower side, Peden. I think the adoption could be more widespread, if you ask me. Having said that, it's we are taking baby steps there, right? Because globally, when I give you some of the numbers, you'll be quite surprised because we have roughly about 77,000 travel proud certified properties today on Booking.com, and this is across 130 countries and territories, ranging, almost 13,000 cities. So it's a fairly sort of widespread program that is in place, right? Obviously, some countries more evolved than the others. India, I would say, is one where there's still a considerable amount of work that needs to be done in terms of sensitizing travel providers, conducting trainings across the board, so that anybody who's LGBTQ plus coming in, let's say they're flying on an airline or they're checking in into a property, the kind of experience that they have should be no different to an experience that anybody else is having there. So I think there's work to be done, but I think it's a journey that the country is going through.
And that's quite encouraging to hear as well. I mean, like baby steps, but we hope to get there. And of course, if travel stakeholders take interest in it, then of course there will be something that might be done. Santosh, I just want to shift gears a bit, and Booking.com also, you guys have been conducting a lot of researches and surveys. So there was one on the travel planning behavior of Indian travelers.
Yes.
Uh, can you share some insights from that from that study? And of course, we've been talking about it. We've been talking about it. Post COVID, we've been talking about it more. We've been making more noise. But how has the Indian traveler evolved? And personally, for you, when you read the study, when you found out, were there any surprises from the study?
Yeah. So again, the travel trends research that you're referring to is a fairly new one that we just put out this year during the summer, and I would say, look, in general, when we think about it from an Indian travel perspective, travel is normalizing this year, right? So people are sort of, in some sense, going back to their pre-COVID behaviors, but also in some sense, there are some aspects of travel which have really evolved and changed from pre-COVID times. When I think about, or when I, mention about two or three things that are quite interesting from the study, number one is that when it comes to events, for example, Indian travelers are much more inclined to travel specifically for events in 2024 than the global average. Okay, so whether it is things like weddings, music festivals and concerts, cultural events, etc., there seems to be a very high inclination for Indian travelers to travel for such events. Also, that plays out when you start looking into the demographic as well. So, for instance, millennials and Gen Z typically tend to dominate some of these decisions when it comes to traveling for events. And also in terms of their ability to travel domestic versus international as well, that plays a part as well, the demographic of the traveler. So I think that's one very interesting thing. Also, another thing that came out is Indian travelers, more so than many of the other nationalities that we surveyed, are planning to extend their business trips by adding on time for leisure. So this combination of business and leisure, it seems to be very high. Almost 80% of the travelers that we surveyed said that they were combining business with leisure when they travel, right?
So what we call blended travel, right?
That's
So
right.
if they're going to attend a conference, then they extend their stay, and they then do their own sightseeing and whatever they have to do,
Correct.
right? Something like that.
Absolutely correct. And also, I think also, since a lot of people now have started returning back to the office, right? So now people, the previous trend of sort of staying at home and wanting to go out very very frequently to get away from work and to separate work from travel. Now again, people are sort of blending it together. So that's starting to happen again. And then the other thing, which is sort of more consistent, I would say, with what we have already spoken about previously, is Indians' love for traveling in groups, right? So traveling with parents, traveling with family, traveling with friends. In general, again, compared to some of the global numbers, Indians' love for traveling in groups continues to be very, very high. Right? And the global numbers come in at roughly about, what I can tell you is, for example, people traveling with their families globally, the number came in at about 55%, whereas for India, it came in at 71%. For parents, for India, it came in at 51%, whereas globally, it came in at 25%. Okay.
Yes, I think it's very typical of the Indian, extended family traveling together, parents, grandparents, kids, and sometimes even the extended families. That is why I feel that, Santosh, don't you see that that's the reason why alternative accommodations also, there's been a notable surge in the demand for alternative accommodations, because you know these travelers are traveling with the extended family, and they want to look for these unconventional and distinctive places to stay. And of course, booking.com has been responding to that growing trend as well. So can you also talk a little bit about the initiatives that you've implemented to support your alternative accommodation partners?
Yeah, look, alternate accommodation is something that's growing every quarter for us. We continue to see an increase in that, both in terms of the supply and also in terms of the actual room nights that we're seeing through our platforms. Even in our latest quarterly earnings numbers that we put out yesterday, we saw again a 2 percentage points increase of alternate accommodation, right, compared to the overall room nights that we're seeing in accommodation, generally speaking. From an Indian perspective, it's very, very interesting because alternate accommodation, there are various use cases. Right? I mean, it goes naturally with Indians' inclination to travel in groups, the desire for privacy, the desire for family travel. It fits in very nicely with those use cases, and we are seeing more and more that there are pockets emerging across the country where alternate accommodation has really picked up quite significantly. And for us, we have done a bunch of things to help partners and travelers in the space of alternate accommodation. Even when we think about our entire tooling and the systems that we have for alternate accommodation, they're slightly different from the standard hotel accommodations, because the types of things that partners who are running traditional hotels want to access, the way they sell their rooms is very different to the way alternate accommodation properties sell their rooms, right? So the structure, the architecture of the extranet is very different. We also have, for instance, these are all a lot of small homeowners, right, running alternate accommodation. So we tend to push the app quite a bit for them in terms of managing their property on our extranet versus the typical website application. We also allow a lot of flexibility. For example, there's homeowner insurance. There is, request to book, which is another feature which is very
Mhm.
important. If you're a homeowner, you want to kind of screen who's coming in and staying at your property, right? So request to book is another feature that we've introduced. And apart from that, we continue to sort of double down on, even for example, the new property signups. Making it very easy for alternate accommodation owners to list their properties with us and get access to really good benefits through our platform immediately, because we see roughly about 40% of new alternate accommodation supply that comes on board with us gets a booking within the first week that they're listed with us, right? So these are all things that we're doing to improve the partner experience when it comes to alternate accommodation.
Amadeus makes the experience of travel better for everyone everywhere by inspiring innovation, partnerships, and responsibility to people, places, and planet. Our technology powers the travel and tourism industry, inspiring more open ways of working, more connected ways of thinking, centered around the traveler. Our open platform connects the global travel and hospitality ecosystem, from startups to big industry players and governments too. Together, redesigning the travel of tomorrow. Amadeus, it's how travel works. Visit us to know more, Amadeus.com.
And Santosh, of course, you spoke about people traveling for events, and of course, right now the biggest event that's happening is the Paris Olympics, and who better than you to talk about sports tourism, right? I'm sure those Booking.com hoardings during last year's World Cup, I don't think it won't be forgotten in a hurry. So I wanted to understand that, because your data shows that Indians are traveling for international sporting events, and so how are platforms like yours supporting travelers who want to combine their love of sports with travel?
Yeah, look, sport tourism, event tourism in general is something that, we've seen a massive increase in the last couple of years. We saw this whole Taylor Swift phenomenon play out last year really
Absolutely.
beautifully across Asia Pacific. We saw a bunch of these Coldplay concerts happening as well across the region that saw a lot of, traffic.
And then Ed Sheeran came to Bombay, right?
That's right, Ed Sheeran, and the rise of music festivals and concerts in general, right? That's been one theme, and I think the other theme has been sports tourism, particularly. It started with the sort of of course, IPL. We see it every year. There is sort of this period
Mhm.
between April, May, where typically for about 45 days, there is a lot of traffic within the country, but that's primarily domestic in nature. But what we are seeing is that, consistent with what I said earlier, Indians are one of the highest, they exhibit one of the highest propensities to travel both domestically and internationally for some of these sporting events. And the ICC Men's T20 World Cup as well, that happened in the US and the Caribbean, we saw at that point a 30 to 40% increase year on year for searches in June, as an example. And for the Paris Olympics specifically, what we've seen is that our search data showed a 30% increase in year-on-year searches during the Olympic dates. And India is actually one of the top five countries from Asia Pacific that have been searching for flights to Paris during this time, right, on our platform. So there's a tremendous amount of interest. And from our end, very simple, Peden, we want to make sure that we have the right supply at the right pricing for all of these bookers who are coming in on the platform. Again, goes back to the point around alternate accommodation, especially in the European cities. When we're seeing increase in ADRs, we're seeing traditional hotels being sold out. Alternate accommodation plays a very key role in ensuring that there is enough breadth and depth of supply in some of these cities to be able to cater to the extra demand from tourists for that particular period. So we do as much as we can to work on supply and pricing during these dates in general.
Interesting to know, Santosh, that Indians want to travel more and more for sporting events. Now, from what we've discussed so far, Indian travelers do seem to be quite strategic in their planning. So, I wanted to understand from you, how can travel companies like yours position themselves to cater to these diverse travel planning styles? Because after all, the report that you came out with McKinsey, the travel you'd said that travel expenditure by Indians across domestic and foreign trips is projected to grow to about $150 billion in 2019 to $410 billion by 2030.
Correct.
And of course, last year you launched a Hindi language option on booking.com as well.
Yeah, look, Peden, I think that's a good question. It's important to understand first, I think, what are some of these intricacies that Indian travelers exhibit when it comes to their entire travel planning, discovery planning, you know, travel fulfillment, in trip, and then post trip behavior, right? That end to end journey. And when we think about Indian travelers, there are a couple of sort of behaviors that they exhibit, which are quite stark in difference when you compare with travelers from across the world, or even from travelers within Asia Pacific. So one of the things is, for instance, like booking windows, right? Indian travelers tend to book very last minute, especially when it comes to domestic travel, and even for international travel, they're fairly notorious last minute bookers, with the exception of course, countries where visas are required, right? Where they need to do a little more planning in advance. The other thing,
But Santosh, I'm sorry to cut you, but this thing about having a very short booking window
yeah,
was there pre-COVID as well, right? This is not a post-COVID phenomenon.
correct. It's actually gotten closer to the pre-COVID behavior because, during COVID, what happened was obviously people were a little more circumspect because of safety reasons, because of other health related reasons, etc. Also, the travel guidelines were a little unclear, ambiguous. But I think now that is starting to return back to normalcy a little bit. But also, having said that, people are, because of cost pressures, people do book in advance sometimes when there are deals available, right? So it's a bit of contradictory behavior that Indian travelers tend to have in this regard. The other thing is that Indian travelers are very highly influenced by social media, and when you social media, OTT platforms, movies and entertainment, etc. Right? We've seen that even playing out over the years, whether it is like movies like, for example, Zindagi Na Milegi Dobara, and right. There have been sort of very interesting locales that have played very nicely to that Indian travel sentiment of getting influenced by celebrities and OTT and films. And so, therefore, social media has become a very important factor in helping Indians make travel decisions. For us, one of the things that we kind of play on is the whole personalization aspect, right? Personalization and direct booking behavior. Now, obviously, for us as a company, while we are connected with partners, while we also invest very heavily on the performance marketing and the social media marketing side, The ideal thing is for a booking to come direct. And even in our latest
Mhm.
earnings report, what we released, more than half of our bookings now are coming through the direct channels, right? Whether it is the website or the app. And that tends to increase when you have loyalty in play. Now, what do I mean by
Correct.
loyalty is, we have a program called Genius. This is our loyalty program that we have for consumers. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. See, essentially, there are two types of loyalty programs that exist today. Right. One type of loyalty program is the one where you tend to collect miles or hotel points, and then after X number of stays or X number of times you've flown, the airline or the hotel will give you some free stay or a free flight or whatever, right? So you have to already incur a tremendous amount of spend before you become eligible to redeem something, to utilize those miles. And if you're absent minded like me, what tends to happen is that forget you forget that you have points accumulated in some program, and then those points expire, or the value of those points continually diminishes, etc. Right? And otherwise, seats are very hard to get when you're trying to redeem miles. So there are all kinds of restrictions. The other type of loyalty program is the one that we have, which is where you get instant benefits. Okay, and that plays very nicely to today's generation. Especially when you look at the millennials, Gen Z, etc. It's the instant gratification generation, right?
So, what do you mean by instant
What I mean by
rewards?
that
What
is
are those
we have
instant
three
rewards?
we have three tiers of the Genius program, right? And at each tier, you get access to certain discounts, and you get access to things like other benefits, like whether it is free upgrades, free breakfast, things like that at the accommodation, or it could now result in a medium where now we're starting to connect other parts of the trip together, right? Like flights, cars, hotels, attractions. So it might mean that you book a accommodation with us, you might get a discount on your flight booking. And what tends to happen with our program, Peden, is that every time you book, there is an instant benefit given back to the user, to the consumer, and that really helps with the whole stickiness. Ultimately, we are a two-sided marketplace, right? We've got partners on one side, we've got travelers on the other. And what tends to happen with the Genius program is, on average, Genius travelers spend about 15% more when they book with us than other travelers. They also tend to book two times further in advance compared to other travelers. And what's more, because they have such a high level of engagement on our platform, they tend to leave 29% more reviews with us compared to any other traveler. Now, on the partner side, what does that do in terms of benefits for accommodation partners or other partners? Is that they tend to see an average increase of 70% in search result views when they join our Genius program. And also, partners who are on board on Genius with us, who are offering benefits to travelers, will see on average 45% more bookings and 45% more revenue as well. Right. So, the beauty of this two sided marketplace is that loyalty has a fantastic domino effect for both supply as well as demand. And that's something that we are playing on more and more, right? With Genius, we are looking to improve that quite significantly. And we see that in the Indian context, that plays out very well because Indians also are, I'm sure you know the numbers. They tend to book very heavily on online platforms, right? Whether it is flights or accommodation compared to
Correct.
some other markets. And therefore, this retention or loyalty goes a long way in terms of appealing to the Indian consumers mindset. And therefore, we are building the whole connected trip, and we are building Genius around it as the wrapper.
Correct. And I think Indians are also value seekers because, I was just looking at hotels for some place and I see that if I'm booking directly with the hotel, it's at least, 5,000 rupees more expensive than booking through an OTA. So I guess, it depends on that as well because, wherever we see value, we will go there.
That's right.
That's interesting to know, Santosh. And, you kind of touched upon it right now in response to my earlier question. But as booking goes beyond hotel bookings,
Yeah.
do you think your connected trip strategy, which allows travelers to book flights, accommodations, car rentals, and attractions all in one place, would be a better fit for destinations like India, where travel is so fragmented?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, look, typically when most people start their travel planning process today, the first thing that they tend to book is a flight. Right, and then usually that's around 60 to 70% of people, and then they get into other categories like accommodation, cars, etc., or attractions. And for us, flights has been the missing piece, right? Because we started and we grew very heavily in the accommodation space for a long period of time since our inception. And a few years ago, we entered the other categories, like flight cars and attractions. And so therefore for us, we really see that as the way forward. I agree, arguably we are a little late to that party, but booking is the kind of company where we tend to play a lot of heavy emphasis on the user experience, and making sure that we are removing friction from the traveler's journey. And therefore, we have been very, very particular about the way we've launched these other categories. And we're ensuring that, one, it is a very seamless process of trip discovery and booking for the consumer in terms of finding all those other categories. And second is, even from a partner perspective, right? We are seeing that there are direct benefits because, a significant number of consumers who are new consumers today with us, who have come on to book a flight with us, go on to book a hotel for the first time. And so therefore that leads to direct benefits for our accommodation partners as well. And so therefore, all parts of that ecosystem are kind of benefiting from it. From an India perspective, I think when you see very heavily, of course, flights are growing in stature. We are seeing so many new flyers coming in today using, flights for the first time. There are a record number of orders in the market in terms of new planes that are being placed by Indigo and Air India. And all of this is a no-brainer for us, right? In terms of making sure that we are playing in those areas as well as one of the leading OTAs in the world.
That's really interesting to know. And thank you so much, Santosh, for this conversation today. It was great to understand the new age Indian traveler through a booking.com perspective. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. If you're listening to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any other platform, please subscribe, rate us 5 stars, or leave a positive review. Your support helps us spread the word about the Skift India Travel Podcast and ensures we can keep bringing you free content every week. If you're watching us on YouTube, subscribe to the Skift channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated whenever a new video drops. Thank you for your support.